We live.
He hasn't given me the thumbs up yet. Thank you, Mitch. Welcome everyone to our Finance Committee meeting on the 9th of November, please. I read the civic affirmation. We gather today to duly and faithfully carry out our duties to the best of our judgment and ability for the advancement of this district and the benefit of all of our community and fellow citizens. And the Coorong Finance Committee members acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the land, that's the Nurunjeri people, whose ancestral lands are on which we meet today. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of Aboriginal people to country and pay our respects to the elders past and present. We extend that respect to all First Nation people. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, when all but Councillor Hill are present, Councillors Rountree and Taylor are on Zoom, and I'm presuming, I'm looking for a thumbs up from them. They can hear us clearly. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Hill at this stage, I'm putting as a late arrival, unless we're told she's going to try and get on Zoom, we believe. Okay, I move on to the confirmation of the minutes of the Finance Committee on the 4th of May 2021. So I move that way. Councillor Bland moves. Councillor Rountree is the seconder. Is there any discussion around them? There being none, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Number 5, questions with notice. Councillors.
Mr Mayor, may I just ask that the questions with notice we have none, the motions with notice we have none. With the motions without notice and the questions without notice, could we leave them till after we have done the draft financial statements for last year and a few of the other items, because I think there's, well, in my opinion, there's just a few questions that if they're not satisfactory, we need them, the questions put into the minutes.
There's no reason why we can't defer them. So we'll do both items 5 and 6. We'll just defer. You'll need to remind me at the end of the meeting, councillor. Bring them back. Right, we'll move to item 7, Coorong Finance Committee Work Program Update and Meeting Dates 2022. There's a recommendation. Councillor Rountree, are you moving? It's a yes.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Thank you. You're a seconder. Councillor Ling, any discussion around that work program? Councillor Arthur.
Yes, Mr Mayor, it's normal to actually get submissions from the elected members and send that out well before February when they start putting the budget together, because we put the budget together in February and it normally takes a couple of months. And last year, if we remember, we had a motion that we go out to consultation earlier.
Yes. Because
of the farming community instead of the middle of seeding time. Unfortunately, that didn't happen due to COVID. But I would have thought that would have been the thing that we would be looking for, is to get an input earlier. And in fact, I think last year when we were talking about it, we were talking about having a meeting with forward projections and that sort of thing in December.
Through you, Mayor, you're quite right, councillor. It's just that we know that the new system and the movement of it will not finish until the 1st of February. So it's probably, this timetable as it is probably suitable only for this year. But you're right, we do want to get to a stage where the budget and the discussion starts before Christmas. But we didn't see that there would be any point while we were working with that system. We can do it, but it is an incredible amount of work still. So we're wanting to get the system in place and then we can fly.
So my question to help is, at what point will a draft budget be available?
For next year.
Next year.
So the draft, James, help me out here, but I would think by May.
Yeah, I think it's probably the second week in May.
Yeah, 3rd of May there.
That's what we're trying to, or have been trying to pull forward to perhaps first, second week of April for quite a few years.
And that would probably work okay, because the 1st of February is a changeover for the new system.
If the changeover works smoothly, we've got a possibility of being earlier. We would anticipate.
Yes, that is a possibility. We don't know until the 1st of February, May.
I don't know if that satisfies you, Councillor Arthur, but we are going to get finally this change in the system, if nothing else.
That's a very
yeah, I
good-
know we've been trying.
Yep.
Any other questions around that? Motion? If there is none, Councillor Roundtree's closing.
Closed.
Thank you. It is the recommendation as it reads, councillors. All those in favour? Those against? It's carried unanimously. Item 8, debt recovery management. There's a recommendation there. Can someone move that way, please? Councillor
Can I ask a
Ling.
question?
Yes, in a second. Get a seconder. Councillor Bland is the seconder. Councillor Roundtree, you have a question?
The 24,549 at 90 days, what is that for? And do we have an idea of when that money will come in?
I'll try first. That will be probably the old rates noted. Would that be rates in there, James?
No, it'd be probably
Just debtors. We'll get a breakdown of that. I meant to do that before we started. Sorry, councillor, we will get a breakdown.
Second question, how much of the 2020 rates are we still waiting on? And what is that figure when it's added to the 21 figure? Is there a compounding number?
Leave it. Just leave it.
Just talk, James.
Talk to it.
The rates trial balance that we've been using out of the system does not give an amount that's outstanding last year. It just actually allocates that when you get a receipt, and we're using that as the what's called an age trial balance. The new system will give us the ability to look at rates outstanding from year on year.
So that outstanding amount is only for 2020, not 21.
It could be for 18, 19, 19, 20, 2021.
Right, okay,
Sounds a whole lot.
right.
Then we'll provide a breakup as much as we can for that. Councillor Hill's arrived, Mayor.
I'm just waiting to get her acknowledge that she is online. I've seen her face briefly.
Disappeared again.
She disappeared on us.
The good news story around the debts is that there is a strong emphasis now on making sure that we're as timely as possible. And as you can see, it's down to 51,000 for this year, which is significantly reduced from the previous year. So it's one of those works in progress.
So Councillor Hill, we can see you. Are you live?
Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, I had some technical difficulties.
No, beautiful. We put you down as a late arrival, so at 1:10, Ashley's noted you joined the meeting, so welcome. We're up to voting on item 8. Tracy, so it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further questions around the debt recovery management, councillors?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Councillor Arthur.
Previously, we were presented with a chart, I suppose, a covenant of the outstanding rates and how long they've been outstanding. There were some that council had given extensions to, which come to the actual elected members to make that decision, not the staff. So obviously the staff make all those decisions now, not the elected members. It was also the fact that section 184 decisions were made by elected members. I don't know if any section 184 have taken place.
So my information, councillor, is that this is not around rates. This is around sundry debtors.
Well, why hasn't it got their
The second
rates
paragraph,
outstanding at the bottom?
So through you, Mayor, the rates, there was no section 184 action last year for COVID. We specifically...
You couldn't, yes.
No, and that has been on hold as well. So we have not returned to that regime yet.
So you haven't revisited the extensions and terms that had been put in by the previous...
No, because remember, councillors, we had a motion in place that said we would limit the debt recovery on rates during the COVID period. Probably COVID's going longer than most of us ever thought it would in terms of the emergency declaration. So there will be a point in time, I would imagine, after Christmas and before the new rate year financial year starts, that we will come back to you with a policy and a program of work around Section 184s.
Any other questions? Thank you. I put the motion, councillors. All those in favour? Those against? It's carried unanimously. We move to item 9, engagement of councillors' external auditor update. There is a recommendation there, councillors. Councillor Taylor and Yench, I have. Is someone wish to speak to it as a councillor?
No, thank you.
Process. Sorry, councillor Taylor?
No, thank you. I don't wish to speak to it.
Oh, I thought you may have. Process is outlined there. It will meet our requirements. There being no further debate, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? It's carried unanimously. Number 10, the draft long-term financial plan. Councillors, perhaps we should move for a suspension of process. Councillor Arthur, you moving that way? Is there a second? Councillor Bland for, I'm going to give us 3/4 of an hour initially till 2 o'clock. Do
We suspend the recording.
we need to, or I don't know we need to?
Oh.
I'm happy if we stayed within the recording process, if that's all right. So the motion is that we suspend meeting procedure until 2 o'clock so we can have a broad discussion on this as a committee. All those in favour of that? I'm looking at the 3 on the screen. Councillors, yes, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Councillor Arthur, you got to vote, yes or no?
No, I thought we finished on that. Didn't I?
No, I've got to look at a lot of screens. Is the trouble. I would declare that carried unanimously. Right. Who wants to lead this discussion?
So we've got the, can we put
PowerPoint presentation, please. Whatever
May
it
I
is.
suggest James?
You could, councillor, but that's my suggestion too.
Ooh, thanks, guys. Okay,
Till 2 o'clock, James.
so what we've endeavoured to do with the help of the CEO and other people in the organisation is to establish a long-term financial plan that provides strategic direction. The last one that I looked at that we had here was 3 pages and said that we're going to make significant losses up until the year 2000, I think 25, 26. How do you finance that? You can't have a long-term financial plan that has significant losses in your cash surplus deficit position and turn around and say that's okay. So this plan tries to address delivering a operational surplus over the period of time. And over the period of time, it delivers a $1 million accumulated loss. And that sounds like a lot in terms, but it's really only about $90,000 a year. So the challenge we have is we want to try and throw around some ideas on how we can bring that back to a more manageable minor surplus position or minor loss position. And I'll go through some items that may come to your attention, which may need to address as well. So the key messages of the long-term financial plan is sustainable and responsible financial management over the long term. Continued responsible service delivery within financial capacity. Integrated cyclical financial management, including asset replacement and operational activities. Asset replacement and renewal is a very important part of the capital expenditure program within the plan. Debt equity ratios are well above the local government reform requirements, and the plan is fully funded as far as asset renewal program ratio compared to depreciation. And in the plan, there is no new borrowings. It's a consolidation plan. So we want to improve on the operating result. We want to maintain stable and predictable rate increases so we don't have hikes. but stable ones. Maintain a responsible and sustainable asset management program. Ensure the continuation and effective delivery of essential community infrastructure services. We want to have management of current and future liabilities and a provision of a framework to deliver responsible financial budgets. What is the path to financial sustainability? Well, critical short-term sustainability is where you measure your working capital, your cash liquidity, and your debt levels. Our working capital last year, when we take out restricted assets, was not above the required amount. In the budget 21-22 it is. And working capital is simply current assets over current liabilities, including restrictions. Medium and short and term sustainability is where you achieve an operating surplus net of abnormal items in capital funding. So when you look at our long-term financial plan, the plan is to deliver an operating surplus before capital income. And I think that's a really critical factor. Long-term sustainability is spending more on asset renewal than consumption, a fully funded replacement gap and meeting community service needs. When we look at the plan, we'll find over the last 5 years, because the plan goes back 5 years and forward 10 years, we will find that Coorong probably spent more on new assets and not on the renewal of their own existing assets. The plan reverses that. Okay. So what do we have? We have an operating surplus of 270,000 average per annum. Doesn't sound a lot, but when you're doing a $16 million budget, you don't want to be too close to the wind. You want to try and have some marginal and moderate surplus going forward. There is a cash deficit of, as I said, $1 million. I found an error in the plan yesterday, and that improved the result by about 700,000 over the life of the plan. I've since fixed that. We have stable employment costs. There is no separation factor. There is no comparatives to last year's forecasts and actuals. It's based on budget. The plan assumes 2% increases in staffing over the life of the plan. Yeah, wages.
Wages, sorry,
Yes.
councillors, we're just looking at that clear.
Oh yeah, not heads, but
Not number of people, but
Yeah.
it assumes that.
sorry for that one. It has a reduction in materials and contracts operating expenses. And for me, this has been the biggest bugbear about our base on what we stabilised on our forecast last year and what we set our budget on 21-22. I believe it was overstated. A reduction in interest expense. So I've seen a lot of plans when they do them and they say, let's just move interest by CPI and there's no new borrowings. Well, it doesn't make sense. Because if you've got no new borrowings, your interest diminishes and your principals increase. A significant increase in depreciation expense based on asset revaluations and changes in useful lives of assets.
Can we just pause there for a moment? With the one around reduction in interest expense, this is what it is now. That is not saying that the conversation into the future may not be about new borrowings, but the assumption at this point in time is that there are no new borrowings. But logic tells us we'll be sitting here in 12 months' time talking about new borrowings about something in particular. And so this plan will then be recast to accommodate that. But at this point in time, there's no prediction of new borrowings. Now, you may decide you don't want that assumption in there, but we're recommending that we leave it there at this minute.
So depreciation expense, we're assuming that our depreciation expense will increase by 25%. We believe that the asset lives, especially on unsealed roads, is overstated and has been overstated for probably about 4 or 5 years. And we're expecting revaluations this year that are going to increase our asset base.
Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
Did I get it right, Matt?
Exactly.
Good. I must add that the plan is based on consolidation and not on growth. It's about stabilising what we've got and managing what we've got and moving forward.
James, just on that, particularly about the depreciation, it's the depreciation of everything or depreciation of particular, like is it particular that the depreciation figures are out also on, say, your plant and equipment and your buildings or your roads? Or is it a general all over? Because, you know, we were employing a company to keep these things up to date for us. So, you know, why is this happening?
It is on all assets. And I will reiterate, for the first time in CDC, as I've seen it for the last 10 years, when we looked at doing the draft accounts for this year, we consolidated all of the assets into the asset management system that had never been done before.
Example? Could you just give us an example there?
Building,
Building planning.
buildings.
There was also some significant disposals of plant that were not recorded as disposals, and we had to have a big clean up to make sure when we presented the asset register to the auditors that there was one sense of truth. And I've got two of my staff here in the room at the moment who played a very big part in that role. I just want to welcome them and encourage them and acknowledge them. So there was a big cleanup.
Yep.
So can I just ask a question then?
Yes.
Apologies.
Never likes the block.
Right. No, I don't. Just the question and just some qualification on what we said to the auditor. Are you saying what we said has been incorrect or the auditor didn't?
Neither of those things. Our books were just untidy. So,
Right.
and the auditors sometimes will look at that, but sometimes they want to make sure that things are just happening as per process, but they won't tell us that we've got assets there that are, you know, 5 years old and they should have been removed off the asset register. That is really just our cleanup and our responsibility getting the house in order.
Okay, thank you.
And without the CEO's assistance, we might have decided to leave it as it was, but it wasn't clean. It wasn't correct, and it wasn't one sense of truth. So there was a lot of my time spent just cleaning 13,000 assets up. That's how many assets we have in the asset register. So
Not anymore.
How many we got left?
13,000. We've got a consolidated asset management ascetic master file now that we've never had before. Anyway, we want stable operating expenditure from year 3 onwards. What's been causing our operating expenditure to fluctuate has been abnormal recurrent grants and where we have unspent grant funds. So we've got to get back to what is our normal, stable operating expense base. And that's what this long-term financial plan addresses.
And with the grants too, there's specific accounting standards and treatments that have to be in place about treating them as assets and liability, revenue and liabilities at particular points in time. And we hadn't quite done that. So now they are, and Councillor Arthur will be happy about this, they're basically put into restricted buckets. And we know that they're a liability until they're expended. So we are now in line with the expected accounting standards around the grants.
It's not, can I just, it's
I've
not,
got to see if you're happy first. That's all.
it's not the right, it's not roads to recovery, one of them, is it?
No.
Oh, good.
And
You are happier,
We
councillor.
got burnt on that a few
they
years
are
ago.
identified in our draft accounts, and I can explain them if you wish. Management of debt reducing from $2.5 million in loans to only 100,000 in year 10. Asset renewal funding ratio of 100%. So our renewing on our assets existing equals our depreciation. That may be an option we may explore later if we want to change the result. Capital expenditure on new and upgraded assets. I've set a base of 750,000 per year with 500,000 from external funding. So when you look at your summary of financial activity, it will show that council is contributing 250,000 towards the 750,000 CapEx. So I've separated new and upgrades from renewed assets. And that's disclosed in the long-term financial plan when you look at the capital expenditure sheet.
Just one thing there. Before, we never did have the differential much between what was operational. now cleaning that up so we know that is capital, we know that is operational, because before it was just a hickledy-pickledy and you really couldn't get your finger on what is actually happening.
And I think Matt can elaborate.
Yeah, and
on the
not-
500,000.
Yeah, and not only are we separating operating and capital better, we're also separating the different types of capital from new, renewal, and in some cases, or often cases of or projects will have a component of renewal and new in them. So we're separating all those out so that we can actually report on when we say, for example, we reconstruct a road or seal an unsealed road, the pavement component is renewal, the seal is new. But that renewal component, we report against our depreciation so that enables us to balance our depreciation and what our capital renewal spend is. So it's basically three types of expenditure. There's the new, the renewal, and the operating.
Matt, can you elaborate about the movement from unsealed road maintenance into capital?
Yeah, also we've identified where historically we've potentially costed some operating expenses on, well, some road operations to an operating expense rather than capital. So that like heavy patching and scarifying, ripping, relaying, those type of operations on a road are actually considered capital, not operating, whereas historically we've expensed them rather than capitalize that work. So that will move stuff, move dollars from our, or increase our surplus and increase our surplus, reduce our expenses.
And it reflects in the balance sheet rather.
Exactly. That makes sense.
So the ultimate challenges, as I see them, maintaining a cash surplus each year in the plan. Not an operating result surplus, but a cash surplus. The plan uses the equity reserves to fund deficits and surpluses throughout the life of the plan. So your reserves becomes a funding mechanism. Reducing asset renewal capital expenditure funding ratio from 100%, and maybe we might strike it at 95%, 97%. I don't think you're ever going to achieve 100%.
No.
And the guides are anywhere between 90 and 110 is about where it sits. And you may want to explore new loans. And we can finance a loan base and stay within debt ratios of about $3 million sustainable for the life of the plan. Obviously, when you're paying more in interest and more in principal, what the plan says, you'll have lower operating cash. So, okay, what are the key assumptions? Well, we've used the 21-22 adopted budget as year one in the plan. So the reason there is if we're managing to our budget and we're reporting to our budget, one would argue that year two and year three might not be too bad. So I've seen plans where plans are year one and they have no relevance to anything. They're just a figure in there and no one knows how we're tracking against it. That's why I've gone back 5 years to give you guys a trend analysis of 15 years. So you can look at what is the movement over the period of time. And that's a very important thing when you look at abnormal items. In the past, it clearly showed to me that the organisation some 5 years ago had a significant sell-off of assets, and I think that was put into consolidated revenue. We're stopping that. That does not occur. The plan assumes zero loss on asset disposals and zero profit. And I think that's the way the plan should reflect it. Okay. Significant, specific, non-recurrent funding projects are identified when possible. So the plan is dynamic, it's not static. We will do a BR1 of the plan and it will change year one and year two and year three. But I'm trying to indicate there that we can look at things when opportunities arise rather than shit, how did that go? Okay.
Just a quick question. Can I ask a question, please?
Yep.
With the long-term financial plan, what I find interesting is that it is fluid and these budgets do change all the time. How much sort of reliability do you ever put into a plan that does expand out for 10 years? Is this sort of a plan of any use to anyone, or are these sort of annual plans better? Because all of this can change next year and we go through the whole thing. It seems like a lot of work. So I'm just wanting to get a feel for that.
Can I?
So first of all, we have a legal obligation to do one. So there's no decision made. The second thing is it gives you an indication of where you want to go or what you want to do, knowing that as soon as you do a plan tomorrow, there's probably something that will cause you to change it. But it's a way of, I suppose, gathering your focus, getting some confidence that the assumptions that we put in will work. If something tells us that CPI is going to blow out to 5, 6, 7%, we'd be back in the chambers here talking to you saying that our assumption around CPI don't make sense in the long term. So you're right in that they will change tomorrow, to be honest. But first of all, we have to have them legally. But secondly, we may as well, if we have to have them, we may as well make them as useful as possible and pick the times when we need to review them. At minimum, it'll be once a year. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, so from elected members' perspective, though, probably our job is more to look at what your key assumptions are, more so than even the numbers and how they all fit together, is really what do we have confidence in what you're using to as your key assumptions to go forward and make these sorts of plans. Would that be right?
So that's why we've put the assumptions here, because this is where I suppose we do need your confidence, if you like, that these assumptions make sense to you and that you're comfortable with them and you can talk with your residents about them. If you're not comfortable with them, then this is where we have the conversation. If you want, say, I don't know, rates and service charges, an average over the plan, you might say we only want 1%. Well, what does that actually mean then for the sustainability over the 10 years? Or you might say, well, that's a bit low. We should have it as 5%. Then again, what does that mean over the 10 years? So it's a way of modelling what we do today, what will it impact over the 10 years? And that modelling, as you know, will change, and we're wise to change it as we know that things change.
So I look at the work that goes into developing this, and then from our perspective in reading this whole document and getting a feel for what's going on, from my perspective, really focusing just on the key assumptions would be, if I had an hour to read it, that would have been where I should have spent my time just reading the key assumptions to make sure that what you're using as a basis is actually going to work. Because one of the things we haven't done yet is this growth strategy and what that might look like. And so if you want to apply any sort of options from the growth strategy, well, that would then change these key assumptions to a certain degree. So I'm just trying to look at how we could have done that better, or, where I need to spend my time. Sorry about my dog.
Right. No, it's not about matter of doing it better. It's knowing that, as you say, Councillor, the growth strategy is coming. That will be a trigger then for us to have another look at this, depending on what the outcomes of that growth strategy are. So we do this, we have the discussion about the growth strategy. As a chamber, you decide what you want out of that growth strategy, and we will then model that in terms of numbers and where the money has to come from and what we want to spend it on, and then you feed that back into this plan. So it is an iterative process the whole time.
It's been described as a living document.
They all are.
I also want to point out that I appreciate and understand the key assumptions give elected members an understanding of how it all forms out, but there might be other elected members that do want to see the numbers. So I put the numbers in so that people can see, okay, this is the assumptions, how do they build and how do they look? It's a strategic financial outlook. It's not a one-year plan. And as the CEO said, legally, we have to undertake a review of the long-term financial plan at least once every year and identify any expectations that we may have got things wrong. It's also, we can control expenditure. So if we can control expenditure and we have a stable expenditure platform, it gives the managers a guiding light as to what the expectations are next year and the year beyond. So it can be a management tool as well.
And one of the things we'll do after this is we will go to public consultation. So again, we will start to change. We may send out the document as it is for public consultation, but we'll also have a layperson's guide to the long-term financial plan that sits over that. So when people are reading it, it's a bit like you said, Councillor Roundtree, what's the first thing you might want to look at? And for most people, it's about what are the assumptions? What is it that the council is basing their modelling on for the next 10 years? Do those assumptions make sense to me? And is the council sustainable with those assumptions in place? So there is still a bit more work to go.
Yeah, and when you're going out for public consultation, I think those sorts of questions about getting, has the council assumed that in the future, this is what our region might look like, and this is what we might do? That's probably good questions to ask, because there's a lot of detail in here, and I'm a detail person and I appreciate the detail and I can see the work that's gone into it. I was just simply trying to work out if we have to focus on what we think could help you guys, it would be whether we really see these key assumptions as being meaningful. And I think that's where the ratepayers would probably look to, have we assumed that we've got that part right?
I wanted to ensure the elected members that we didn't fall into the same trap of having a 3-page long-term financial plan that we did last time, because that doesn't give them enough information to understand exactly where we're going either.
Councillor Yench?
It's a delicate balance.
Yes.
Look, I think that where it's headed is excellent. It is fairly easy to follow. Sorry, I'm speaking. It is easy to follow, but as you have said, and I concur, and that is our growth strategy will have significant impact potentially on what we are putting out. So therefore, I believe as this goes out to public consultation, there should at least be some acknowledgement that the growth strategy will have potential impact upon this as to where the council goes. I have grave concerns that in the future, we are going to see less grant money coming, and that is something that we need to be very aware of.
And you are, Councillor, what will happen through you, Mayor? We'll have the growth strategy will change it. There'll also be a couple of paragraphs around the, I suppose, the context of CPIs. I don't think it's a wise or certain person who is predicting CPIs in this environment. What will it look like post-COVID? I don't think anybody quite knows. So there's a whole lot of things that are really quite organic in this environment that will affect this plan, that we would have almost as assumptions in writing rather than the numbers.
Yeah, they're not a get out of jail free card, but what they are is informing the broader population that everything is fluid. Things can change. We don't know where things will be in 6 months' time.
I'm not quite in debate. I'm looking at the 20 minutes I've got spare. I'm looking at James and he says he's got plenty more to tell us.
James?
I'll take the elected member's point.
Councillor Taylor, but we are sort of at a workshop, Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to thank James and his team for putting this together. It's fantastic to see a real long-term financial plan. Something that wasn't written on the back of a cereal packet. It looks really good. I do agree regarding the growth strategy. However, at the end of the day, we're a small council regarding numbers of ratepayers, and we have to bear that in mind. So while we might have fantastic big ideas, the growth strategy has to be spread out over the life of the long-term financial plan as well. I'm curious, James, regarding the expectations. What do you, if it's going to come up in the briefing, then fantastic, and answer it as you go. But I'm just wondering what your gut feel is regarding the expectations for, let's say, the for most of them, actually. I mean, we can see what the rates and services charges are, but regarding the expectations, what's your gut feel around those percentages?
I think my gut feel is around the percentages that they're conservative. They are a consolidation rather than a growth. I think they are minimal risk. And it's probably, if I had been given more time, I probably would have taken the words plus expectations out. It can be misleading. I want to point you to the operating grants non-recurrent. The plan assumes that we have a significant reduction, and that's why I've split abnormal grants away from recurrent grants, especially in the last 5 years. We've had significant grant funds, and I don't think they're going to continue. So the plan assumes in operating grants for LAP and things like that, I put a base of $400,000 a year, which is significantly lower than what we have had in the past. I have also reduced materials and contracts where LAP grant funding has also diminished as well. So the plan has commensurate value between revenue and commensurate value between expenditure in respect of those grants.
Grants are interesting. Remembering next year there's 3 elections. Joy. 3. Because the federal one has to be next year by the way we're going. And the other thing that may prove us wrong in this area is depending on how serious the Commonwealth government is around climate change and the deals that have been done between the two parties, whether that will turn into grants or any sort of a LAP type of funding for our agricultural sector. That's sort of the unknown that's sitting there. And I suspect that will either emerge just before the budget as an opportunity or post-budget as a consolidation. And to be honest, none of us have got that crystal ball. No, but at this stage, if you think about the debt that the Commonwealth government's carrying, you can't imagine the grant regime will continue for much longer. With grants, we could all be wrong.
Okay, I want to now refer to the main pertinent values that I see in the long-term financial plan as distinct from the key assumptions, and it might help understand my little lateral thinking or lack of. Page 12 is an interesting one. When we look at the operating surplus deficit going back, significant surpluses in the years 16, 17, 18, 19, 19, and 20 and 21. Now, that is simply, I think, because of in the first 3 years sale of assets, and I can show you how that becomes evident when we look at the summary of financial activity. We're not going to go down that road. And you can see that the surplus is building in the plan. Now, it's building simply because of the interest expense and the reduction in operating expenditures. The other one I want to point you to is page 14. When we look at capital revenue, we have the same concept. Now, capital revenue is there to fund new and upgraded assets. It's been significant in the last 3 years. And I've said in the plan, we're going to only have $500,000 every year in capital income for new assets. Maybe tough, but that's what the plan assumes. So I just want to point out that our capital revenue can distort your operating result if you're taking capital income into account.
So does this take into account current proposal on footpaths? New footpaths or not?
Not yet. That'll be something that we built in. And that's a very good example of, we're not at that point to put it in here yet, but
Right.
yeah.
Page 16.
But without this, we can't determine whether we can afford to.
Page 16, operating grants non-recurrent. Significant. And again, it just means it's just going to plateau. So I'm not putting a whole reliance on new grants and new assets and new expenditures for grants that may not come in. I think that's very dangerous. I want to take you to one of the statements in the plan now. Where I can find it. Page 32.
So just page 17, your user charges, you've actually got a bit of a dip.
Yep.
And then a slight rise.
There was an allocation error in prior years on what was a user charge and what was a statutory charge.
Right.
So it just fixes it. I'll refer you to page 31. Page 31 assumes we're going to make a operating surplus of, it's 80, 90 here, it should be 165 of that error that I said before. and it grows to, I think about 700,000 at the end of year 10. Okay, so it shows that we're making more money because no loans, principal, no interest repayments. So we may need to look at that and modify the plan a little bit. The other one is page 32. We can see there that principal loan repayments are going to go down from 383 to 99. In there, it's interesting because when you look at your proceeds from capital income being only 500, and you look at your capital expenditure for new assets, you can see there's 750 there. So it's really putting a basis of, okay, we've got 250 grand up our sleeve if an opportunity arises.
Within this plan, you've actually got from, when's it, 2023, actually doubling expenditure on footpaths, haven't you?
Yep. Yeah, because
That's not new, but councillor, that's just existing still.
and
Haven't made that decision though.
No.
But they've made that is an assumption.
Yes.
and I think that's addressed by increasing the depreciation expense from 4.3 to 5.6. So it frees up a lot more. You'll notice in the plan, when we look at the CapEx schedule, which I'm about to refer to in a minute, the significant refurbishment of buildings.
Yep.
That is also, buildings has been left as a poor cousin to the roads. I'll put the reserves in there, the assumptions. I want to look at page 41. Now, page 41 is interesting. The renewals in the past started at about $4 million. For this year, they're going up to 5.6 and they're holding it around 5.6, 5.7, going up to 6.9 at the end of year 10. So it has a similar pattern to the increase in depreciation expense from year 2 onwards. You can see in there that in the past, we spent a lot of money on new assets. 2.7 in 2021, 800,000 in 2020, 2.3 in 2018. And we dropped the expenditure on renewals, especially in 2021.
I think, James, I did notice in that with your capital expenditure, the previous long-term financial plan, which I think it's 3 years old now, isn't it? It's supposed to have been done every year, but I don't think.
We did a mini one last year.
Yeah, right, okay. The CWMS didn't have much capital works involved, but I see you up to like 300 and we'll say nearly $350,000 up, nearly up to $400,000 next year. But that's for capital works.
Yep.
How do you come at a figure of capital works for our CWMS at this stage?
Based on the plan, I looked at the revenue we generate from the ratepayers. I took off the operating expenditures that we outlay and the depreciation. And I said, okay, depreciation, this should be at least renewing in the CWMS every year.
And some of it is a bit guesstimate. So what we'll do every year is we might sit here and say to you, we've earmarked 300,000 for this year's CWMS, but we think we can push it out and give the plant some birthday rather than actually renewing it or replacing it. We'll just give it a birthday for a minute. And so we push out that expenditure a bit more. And then Matt will come along and say, yeah, but don't forget your maintenance costs will go up like this, even if you're not doing the renewal. So it's always a balance of that. Do you buy something new or do you, and understanding the maintenance costs and the ongoings, and there's a sweet point where you know you've got to replace the asset, but it could be out by a year, it could be out by 2. So you have that discussion and you look at the asset plans every year to help you make those decisions about when you should do that.
Well, that is one area which has previously been pretty well spot on. You know, the year before last, we spent $532,000 on capital works, and we were virtually 2 years in front. We knew we had to pay that. So, you know, like, and then for the next 5 or 6 years, there was only 80 to 100,000 maybe.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a big, and you're talking, you know, when you're talking 10 years, you're talking $3 million. You know, like it is, someone should say. well, you're going to spend $3 million. What's it going to be
And
spent
you
on?
might use a combination of reserves and that fund,
Yeah.
for example. I wanted to portray the plan, as I said, as consolidation. So we establish a level playing field.
Yep.
To put a lot of growth in it at an instant means we lose the context of where we came from.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Matt. James, taking you back to page 31, the operating surplus from year 2, 2023, shows an increase year on year. What's that to cover? Because I wouldn't necessarily expect to see an increase in the operating surplus.
It's mainly because of combination of finance costs, a reduction in materials and contracts based on a reduction in non-recurring grant income, where our normal income would be growing by about 3%.
Okay, so I mean, I would expect to see that more of a break-even point. So rather than to increase the charges year on year in order to increase the operating surplus, is that just to sort of cover your back in the?
You might find that the assumptions around CPI would change that quite quickly. So if the CPI and the rates increases were to be significantly different, and I'm thinking lower than what's predicted here, then that would go down. Probably as you get to years 6, 7, 8, and 9, it's really the reliability of the figures is getting, as you said, Councillor Roundtree, it's getting to the point where it's nice to understand it, but you know that the reliability of them is not great. It's more about just demonstrating over the 10-year period what it would look like. But you would almost bet that years 6, 7, and 8, those surpluses won't eventuate like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the modelling is, the inputs, the outputs are only as good as the inputs, et cetera, which are always pie in the sky anyway. But I just would have expected to have seen a flatter figure there, because that's what you when you look at it, you do unfortunately get people who look at it and say, oh, we're going to make that much. So why do we need that kind of increase? I know you've got to put something in, obviously. But I was just wondering what James was thinking of covering with that rolling increase. I agree with CPI, although I don't see any reduction in that in the short term.
I think when you look at years 1 to 5, we got a profit of 165,000 on a revenue base of 16.8 million. Then we go down by negative, we go into a negative 71, then we go 46, 134, 164 and 261. It's not until we get out to year 7 that we have significant increases in the operating result. I could make all that zero and fudge the expenditure and say there's going to be zero and we're going to break even. But I think we need to be honest and say this is what the plan has indicated is 264,000 on a 16, 17, $18 million revenue base, outlandish. Because if something comes up out of the blue, we've got no flexibility if we just say everything's going to be zero. That's just my viewpoint.
$260,000.
That's right.
Where the borrowing capacity comes in, as you said, 3 million.
Yeah.
Before it significantly affects anything.
Yeah.
Yep.
How much more have you got to say?
I'm open for questions. I've got 4 minutes.
We've got lines you may want, but so we're open to a general questions now. You've said what you need to say, James.
Have I said what I need to say?
I'm asking you.
Yes, I have.
Questions, councillors?
A quick question.
Councillor Bland, yes.
Just reading the preamble and on page 5, just going back around the assumptions on abilities, really. How comprehensive is this? This page 5.
Is it about the asset management page?
Yes, sorry, it is under long-term financial.
Speak to your mic, councillor, you know that.
Sorry?
Mike,
sorry.
So that's going to community facilities.
Yes, so I'm just wondering on 4.2.2,
It's
4.2.3.
it's probably illustrative rather than comprehensive.
I think that point needs to be made because just looking at it, for example, the lighthouse isn't in there. It is our responsibility. It's an expensive cost. And Wadmore, I think, is not in there. And that is one of the newer assets that ended up on our. So I'm sure there are others as well, but I just think some of those key.
Page 5.
I'm not sure if they're in our plan, but they should be if they're not.
And it's great that you bring this feedback to us. And we can say, okay, what have we not listed there?
Yeah, and maybe there's others that I spend a bit more time looking at.
Bangaringa.
Bangarinda.
We'll have a look at how we actually present that because I think it's illustrative rather than comprehensive.
And I think you either say that.
Yeah.
Because, and we have the comprehensive stuff behind it, but if we're missing it in the comprehensive, it affects other things,
Yeah.
so.
Going back to the comment about the list of assets that we have, it's certainly comprehensive now. This was just a.
I can take that feedback and I like constructive criticism.
Further questions? Councillor Arthur, sure.
No, it's a very good and
One more
comprehensive
question.
report and took a lot of getting through, particularly when
Like to
it's
review
been
it.
split up into capital and
When will you review
various
the
works.
analysis?
It actually makes it a lot easier to understand. And as I've been saying,
How many
the other
years?
thing is too, we hopefully will have some updated depreciation
Sooner when the new
figures to
council
work on, because that's the key in local government. That's the key, isn't it?
training.
And Matt,
You got to get his attention.
And Matt,
Matt's
I'm not
on
gonna bring it
to
up here.
I'm on to everything. I'm just,
appreciation increase.
yes, yeah. So,
it may not be an increase, but it probably is, but you know, like you've got to have significantly right figures.
absolutely. So we are currently working with our asset management provider or our software provider to work through a revaluation of all our asset inventory or a checking of our values more than a revaluation, just to ensure that we are accounting for all of our assets properly, which may, as you said, change our depreciation figures. That will then give us an indication of what we theoretically need to spend annually. But then we can make good informed decisions about how we fund inert assets like stormwater and CWMS and the things that don't fail or aren't like a fluid asset like a road where you need to maintain it every year. So as long as your spend or your renewal spend on an asset is a rolling average, then you're okay. So for example, the example you said before, Councillor Arthur, about CWMS, we won't spend anything on CWMS for 4 or 5 years, but in the 5th or the 6th year, one of our treatment plants needs complete replacement. So it might be a $600,000 or $700,000 process, but over that 5 or 6 years, it's $100,000 a year average. So that's the process that we're going through at the moment. It's taking time, but I don't think we're that far off in that space, to be honest.
Just one question, James. Didn't we have a proper listing of all these articles? Depreciation schedule sheet?
In prior years. No.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking.
But we fixed it.
Is any,
And it's a very difficult exercise. You've got one system that is so clumsy, and the previous put some of the assets in the ascetic system and some of the assets in the civica system. And for management probably were not aware. I only became aware when I started to look at things more critically. And I'm not going to put my name to getting a set of accounts that becomes qualified, because the auditors say, where are the asset register? Oh, shit, I don't know. I didn't know to do that. Sorry. So put a lot of emphasis on that. Worked tirelessly with the R&I team. And I think we got the result. I think the auditors are very happy with the draft accounts. They're one of the next items. We can discuss those. So we're in a good space.
Okay. I'm going to say it's 2:02, Ashley, and we revert back to meeting procedure. So I'm assuming that all the questions have been asked, but I would really like someone to
I'll move that one,
move.
Mr Mayor. We accept that.
You're moving the recommendation, councillor Arthur, are you?
Certainly am.
Okay, is there a seconder?
Yeah.
Councillor Yench is the seconder of the recommendation is that the Coorong Finance Committee review and note the draft long-term financial plan. Is there any debate around this motion, councillors? There being none, you'll close. Thank you. I'm going to put the motion as it reads. Councillors, all those in favour? Those against? It's carried unanimously. I move to item 11 on the agenda. Summary of council's investment and debt. There's a motion there, councillors, a recommendation, sorry. Someone prepared to move it for a purpose of discussion? Councillors Hill, and I think Councillor Lang, was that your hand I saw?
Yes.
You wish to ask any questions? Councillor Hill is the mover, or you?
Not at this stage, thank you.
Thank you. We were just, you want to say anything, James, briefly around this report? Number 11. 11, we've gone to item 11.
I'd just like to say that, yeah, we have considerable cash and investments sitting in the account. We have $5.2 million sitting in the investments and bank account at the end of June 2021, of which 4.6 was restricted. So we had a working capital of about $500,000, $600,000. This report shows 7.5 million, but you've got to remember that you generate most of your rates income in the first quarter. And so that will diminish as time goes by.
Important, James, through you, Mayor, could you just explain to the councillors what restricted and unrestricted is and how you've done it with grants, please?
Yes. Restricted grants, in this instance, that we put into the accounts, the draft accounts, we've got $1.6 million sitting in prepaid grants where the commitment upon the grant recipient has not been satisfied at that point in time, unspent. We've got $1.6 million sitting in an equity reserve for prepaid general purpose grants and untied road grants that were received on June 28. So they are monies that are sitting in our banking investment, but I'm using the matching principle. The 1.6 received on June 28 is really prepaid for 50% in the 21-22 year. We have to acknowledge that. And the second part is we will have to start spending the unexpended grants to fund the projects so that they can be completed. That's the difference between restricted and unrestricted cash.
Beautiful. Thank you. Has anyone else got questions around this report? Councillor Taylor.
Through you, Mayor, to the Director of Finance. Sorry, I've just upgraded his title then.
A promotion, I can't afford it.
To James,
Oh,
sorry. To James. Regarding the loans, so currently listed are 2.4 million, just over 2.4 million in debenture loans. When you were talking in the long-term financial plan about the council being able to carry a loan debt of 3 million, was that 3 million on top of that amount, or was that 3 million total?
3 million ceiling.
So we need to look at the how the 2.4 comes down over the length of the long-term financial plan before taking on substantial debt in those 10 years.
Yep, and that's on page 37, I think, in the long-term financial plan. No,
Okay.
page 36. So on page 36, we've put principal outstanding on all existing loans, principal repayments, interest repayments, And I put a graph in there about the loan balances over the next 10 years. So you would look at, okay, we can finance a ceiling of $3 million. When does it start to diminish? It gets down to about 2.3 at the end of year 3, 1.9 at the end of year 4. So they're the times you might want to look at increasing it up by $1.1 million to sustain a $3 million ceiling. You've got to remember that money is pretty cheap at the moment through LGFA. I think it's 2.8% fixed. So it is and debt is not a bad thing. It's a leverage for intergenerational equity project. So it's something we should welcome rather than ignore.
Yeah, thanks for that, James. I agree. Debt can be good as long as we can afford to pay it back over the long term, and as long as we hopefully get an increasing ratepayer base. But thanks for that.
That's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Roundtree's next. I'm watching Councillor Arthur though.
Mine's very quick. When you just mentioned before that the interest rates are low for a fixed period, what is that fixed period at the moment?
I'm going to let the CEO answer that because the direct managers have just walked off for a second. So I'm working too.
I think and I'll have to check this, but I think they're around about 3 years, Miles. Yeah. So it's a bit like a bank. You can take out whichever period you want, but they are very cheap and they'll find the best and try and accommodate as well. So we have very good.
So if we wanted to borrow money for fixing up some roads or a major project, can we get this low interest rate, but for 10 years? Can you negotiate those sorts of terms?
I'm not sure about the 10 years, Councillor. I'd have to check what they would think about that. Caldy Road is over how many years? I'm sorry, I don't know.
10, I believe it was.
10. But again, it's a negotiated thing, depending on what you want to do.
So
It could certainly help us get our roads in order if we could get that cheap money over a longer period.
So, councillors, that's the consideration you need to make is if you had a substantial road or some other project, would you borrow for that within that sort of guidance around 3 million in total debt? That's, I think, what we're saying.
There's two ways of looking at it. You could say Heinrich Road, is the appetite to borrow 6 million to do it all, or half of it at once? Is that about $12 million job? Or
Freeway.
yeah, or do you want to borrow, I don't know, make it up, 4 million to correct every road that we've got to a level that you think is an adequate service level? And I think this is where we really don't know what our service level offer is to residents yet. We need to do some more work to say it is acceptable maybe to have one pothole but not 3. Now that's a very simple way of looking at it, but we would never have deep enough pockets to have perfect roads. We've got 95% of our roads, as Matt showed you, last time in that report, that are pretty well spot on, and we have 5% that give us grief a lot of the time. And our most famous example, of course, is Baltalic. So it's not like all of our roads need attention, but we could pick a couple, and Baltalic's a good one if there was an appetite, and we're more than happy to work out how that would be costed if through a loan arrangement, if that's what the chamber want us to do. And it may be something that we have to do, and SLURP is probably part of that funding arrangement as well. So it's probably a combination of sources of money, as with most things.
Councillor Arthur, you going to?
Yeah, just, James, the Meningie Stormwater Streetscape, I thought the repayment on that was $172,000 a year plus interest. I see you've got here a balance in April and then a balance in September. We split the payments nothing adds up.
What page you on? What page you on?
I don't know what page it is. 59.
Oh, you're looking at page 59.
59?
Not of the long-term financial plan.
No,
Different plan.
wrong document.
Summary of council investment and debt, number 11.
Yeah, that's as at September. The long-term financial plan is as at June.
But I'm just asking, do we do it in 6 monthly increments?
Yeah, we do two partly biannually we do the repayments.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Your question, councillor, is in those three loans we have, 3 principal loans, we pay 6 monthly as a general rule with LGFA. Is that what you're really saying?
We can really pay them, to be honest, Mayor.
Yep,
Well,
that's
it
how we-
appears that's the case,
Yeah, 6 monthly.
but that's a
That makes
September,
sense.
April. Just sort of keeps us clear of the 30 June.
Yep.
Any other questions, councillors? There's none. Councillor Hill, you'll close.
Closed.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is that the Coorong Finance Committee receives and notes the summary of Council's investment and debt report. All those in favour, please. Those against, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. We move to next one, Ash.
Yes.
Well, why have I not got 12 easy to find? Item 12, the draft financial statements for 2021. Councillors, is there someone prepared to move that way? Councillor Yench is the mover. Found it. Is there a seconder? The recommendation is that the committee receive and note the report. Is there a seconder? A seconder, Councillor Lang, thank you. Is there any to the draft financial statements are in the form submitted to the auditors? So we expect finalised statements to be received in certified form in time for the Audit and Risk Committee meeting of the 16th of November. Should this not occur, the draft financial statements will be available for presentation. Should this not occur, the special meeting on the 23rd.
It's the latter, Matt.
We
Speak
are
to you,
having-
Matt. They won't be, the auditors won't be finished with them by the time the audit committee comes along, but we have had a conversation with them. There won't be material changes. They're just going through their process. So they're quite happy to present, for us to present the draft.
And then we will have as our full council on the 23rd of November, a special meeting, meet our requirement to have it dealt with by the end of November.
Yes, correct.
Councillors, I presume you've read this thoroughly. I've attempted to.
I have.
Yeah, thank you. I hope so. Hope you have. Is there any discussion around this going forward in draft form, of course, to our audit committee?
Yes.
Mayor, we've also, sorry, the audit chair has also had a look at them as well. So it's
Our
not like.
audit chair is also already in the picture. Councillor Roundtree.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted, there's a couple of things I've noted. So this is referring to note 3. It looks like we've removed around $470 from materials, contracts and other expenses, but added in 782,000 or 738,000 to pitching on actual wages to the employees' cost. So that 312 difference, is that just extra employees or has something else happened? I know we had contractors and we've moved some to more permanent staff. So is that what the difference would be there?
No, what distorts the comparisons is a separation factor. When we do the budget, we assume 100% fully budgeted positions. As the year progresses, we have vacancies, which we don't have to pay wages to. They build up over time. When you look at last year's actuals of 4.35 against 2020 against 2021, it shows stable or significant increase in salaries and wages compared to 2020, but 2020 has significant separation factor applied into it.
Can you explain just what you mean by separation factor, like separation benefits?
No, just staff leaving. So there's always a lag generally.
Okay.
Yep,
Councillor, while we would budget for everyone being here all the time, the reality is
it doesn't happen.
that that's
Yeah.
virtually impossible to achieve. And therefore, we make a gain financially over 12 months almost invariably.
And we will budget 100% without a separation factor unless I'm directed otherwise.
So
Okay.
And to you, Mary, it
So
may
the
be
other-
that we-
the second question is,
Sorry, yeah. I saw that the elected member expenses had dropped, which is very good. I think we've got a saving in there, which is great. Things like there's no telephone and communications expenditure for 2020, but 58,000 in this year. Is that just a reallocation or what that? And I suppose and then the next question is on a similar vein. and that the licensing costs have jumped to nearly $500,000 from 152,000. And is that the new accounting software? I just thought they needed a bit of extra explanation.
To you on, councillor.
Councillor for us.
Right.
You're gonna pay-
It's still on the note 3.
Note 3. So there's two questions. Your first one was around councillors' expenses.
Yeah, around the telephone expenses.
I noticed a wry smile from the executive officer here. And you know, we're having a workshop coming on around councillors' travelling expenses. So the mayor would be as guilty as anyone of not submitting quarterly. That may be a reason why there was a slight reduction in last financial year. And of course, councillors, today we've got 3 councillors that haven't got a travel expense coming here because I can see you on the Zoom. So, but that would be just a reality of the situation at the moment. The second question was repeat it for us, please.
So if you go to note 3 on the expenses.
Yeah, might see the phone.
Yeah, so sorry, this internet's the vocals are a bit fuzzy there, comes in and out, a bit sporadic. So what I'm just looking at is in the 2020 column, there's at least 4 things that don't have numbers in them. And in the 2021 column has quite large numbers, like licenses are 552,000. Conferences and seminars and training, we've got 68,000. And we know that these things happened. Is there a reason why it's just not reported in that previous year? And it looks like a massive jump.
The licenses one, I can't find where you're reading, councillor, but the license is around the insurance and where we recorded it last time. It's not that one? No.
James.
Sorry. Councillor, when you look at contractors statutory in 2020, you can see $2.7 million. And what I have done, and we have agreed to, is a redistribution of the materials and contracts to give us a better indication of the type of expenditure that we're incurring. I would imagine that the 152 in licenses was wrong, simply wrong. It's probably that the 300,000 that should have been in there in 2020 was sitting in contractors statutory. The other thing is when you look at sundry of 493,000 in 2020, I've got rid of that to redistribute it according to where the expenses are likely. So you are going to get a distortion on your comparatives in this year, and it will be more meaningful going forward into future years. I did the same in the budget. Rather than lumping materials and contracts and services into one bucket, including insurances, levies to government, telecom, utilities, and interest expense, I've separated those out individually. So the bottom line is interesting. We've had a reduction of about $500,000 in materials and contracts on 2020 to 2021.
So I suppose your comment.
That's real.
The comment, yeah, in sundry, there was 493 sitting in sundry in 2020. What you're saying is that you've just taken it out of sundry and moved it to where it should be recorded so that next year we will see that comparison.
That is correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Same with licenses as well.
Right. Now, the big jump in licenses is the new software that we've paid for. Is that recorded there in licenses, or would that be somewhere else?
No, that's capital expenditure.
That won't be here.
Okay. Radio. That's a very big jump in recording there.
What I'm saying is the other 350,000 in 2020 is probably sitting in contractors statutory or in sundry.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, councillors, any other questions?
Yeah, just
One more if I could, please.
No, you can wait a little minute, please.
Okay.
Councillor Arthur.
James, regarding the reserve accounts, we've got unexpected grants reserve, 1.56 million. So those are the grants that, like, say, the road grant we get on the 30th of June, sorry.
June, correct.
Yeah. And also in there, the Titanara airfield has got $33,000 in it.
Yep.
The $3,000 paid into it last year on this last financial year. What's happened to that?
Probably goes in as lease income.
Sorry?
It's probably reflected as lease income.
It is a thing that goes into the airfield. It's the airfield that's leased and to a propping, and they pay that and it goes into that fund and has for many, many years. So,
I'll address
What is your
that.
question, councillor?
well, I'm just asking where it is. That should be 36,000 instead of 33, the reserve for the.
Dan is listening to this. You better quickly, Dan, seek refugee status.
We have a technical interloper.
Yeah, I was going to say.
No.
Could have a look, but we may have used it for some maintenance or something. I'm just
No,
guessing.
well, that's not what I saw. And if you go back to 2019, it was 29,000 and it's 33,000. It's at
We'll
least-
have a look.
Yeah.
I've
Okay.
missed it, but I'm not. Council.
No,
The sundry.
I can tell you when the account was paid, who it was paid by. I've got all the details.
That can be addressed. Councillor Roundtree had another one. Councillor Roundtree, do you have another one?
Sorry, I thought you could hear me, but you can't hear me. So, yeah, so on page 44, where we talk about open space trust fund reserve, I hadn't heard of that before. So what are the conditions around establishment of a new open space reserve? And there's 45,000 sitting there. How does that work?
With the reserves, there's a couple. You'll also notice there's an $8,000 one there for Meals on Wheels. We will tidy all of those up in BR1. So they're just remnants of old accounting as we cleaned up. We made sure that we showed what was there, but they will disappear, particularly those couple, because they're no longer relevant. So they will just move, the money will move back into general revenue.
I just get Miles just to talk about the statutory part of the open space reserve.
Good. Yeah.
So just on that, when there is land divisions occur, there's a contribution to open space reserves. Now that is held by the state government, so it's different to this. However, you can access that money through grants programs. And if you also, and because it's a dollar for dollar contribution, then if you have a reserve, then you're readily able to use that money to hopefully successfully get an open spaces grant through the annual program.
Okay. I'm
My-
nearly there. Councillor, you happy?
Just last very quick one. I just need to know what note 12 on page 47, functions, business undertakings, $270. What is that?
Hasn't been finished yet.
Okay, no worries.
It'll take me 3 days to work out that note.
No worries.
I'm going to take it you're completed, councillor. Is there anyone else got questions?
I would like to point out something.
Point it out, James, please.
When you go to note 3 on the expenses, depreciation, you will notice our depreciation has reduced than what it was in 2020. But our information technology depreciation has gone from 0 to 189,000. That was part of the cleanup of assets that were on Civica that had not had a cent of depreciation applied to them since 2002. And Linda can vouch for that. So also what we have done is we have put a 20% residual on plant. So the depreciable value of plant reduces because we're acknowledging that the book value will not drop below a certain value. In the past, that had 0 residual value, and which it meant when you got rid of plant, you're making a significant profit on the sale, but you're heavily appreciating the expense of the year to get to that point, and we don't want to be in that position. So I just want to point that out. Also want to point out note 8. Now it's important in note 8, I think it's note 8. Liabilities? No, it's, note 8, liabilities. We've identified $1.632 million in unexpended grants. prepaid because the grant condition has not been met. Under AAS 158-15, that's the way we've got to apply it. It wasn't applied correctly last year. So what I have done is put the 994 last year, as you can see, for some reason has rates in advance. Rates advance is not a grant. So it shouldn't have been in that schedule. So we've fixed that and we've said the $1.6 million, we've got 110 in for Murray Coorong Trail unspent. We've got 362 for revitalising Relkin, 144 for Wellington, 148 for LICP1, 315 for LICP2, and 553 for LAP. So we can clearly see our unexpended grants rather than having it mystified somewhere else in the draft accounts. I just wanted to point that out.
What about the walking trail? Relkin money, we've received money for that, haven't we?
That's the revitalising.
Revitalising
Relkin.
route.
It's there.
I didn't see that.
360.
Second one, councillor.
Sorry, went straight off the top of it.
Okay. I reckon we're nearly there, councillors.
Just one other thing. Last year and this year has been sale of plant. How are we actually putting that through? I see you wrote us an email. It was a $23,000 because you're taking the depreciation figures back that's been worked over it. But how do you put the cash that we receive into the system now?
Okay, the cash that we receive it comes in as capital proceeds. It cannot be reflected in your P&L or your statement of comprehensive income. It's a funding source. It's not a revenue. The revenue and expense is a difference between the book value and the proceeds. And that's under note 4 in here. And we sold plant with a book value of 216 and with proceeds of 193, I think.
I'll just ask you one other question. When you say you've put the depreciation figures up to 20%
Residual,
right?
only on plant.
Yeah, on plant. Well, how has that affected it when in lots of instances, quite a bit of our plant has been written off to nil? And over the period of time when we've actually sold them and got some reasonable money. So that is, if I'm a business, if I sell, if I buy a tractor, I depreciate it at a period of time, I buy it for 100,000, I depreciate it at 20% per annum, whatever it is. And then when I sell it, the valuation, my valuation is $20,000 and I sell it for $45,000, it's immediately a 25%. It's not a gain, but it's a 25% which goes into income. How do you relate to that? Because we have got some of those things that were written down to very low residual values, which sold well above them.
We have applied a 20% residual value, equivalent to a trading value on all plant that is currently in the system in the asset register.
So that's for this year, starting this year.
It's starting this year.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
In the past, it wasn't done.
No, that's what I meant. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, councillors. Councillor Yentz will close, I would hope.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On my compliments, I think staff have done a brilliant job. Thank you.
Cheers. I will put the motion as it reads. All those in favour? Those against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 13. Item 13, the Statement of Comprehensive Income and Expenditure 30 September 21. And the recommendation is that the Coorong Finance Committee receive and note the Statement of Comprehensive Income and Expenditure to the 30th of September. Someone move that way, please.
Happy to.
Councillor, a voice from Councillor Roundtree and Councillor Taylor. Are you going to be the seconder? Or you want a question?
I'm the seconder.
Just, okay. Councillors, you've read the report. What questions have you got? Councillor Arthur and then Councillor Bland.
James, just one question here. It's always annoying to me that how we present the revenue as if it's all been paid. Now, with our new accounting system, which is going to cost us heaps of money, we actually have the income as it's actually collected. If we look at the sheet here, you've got rates, budgeted, actual, 10 million, 10 million, 10 million.
You can't. We
Why?
use what's
I
called.
can't understand any business that does not record the income as it's received.
Local Government Act and the Australian accounting standards are based on accrual accounting, whereby if we had to do that, you just imagine the rates, we're only recording the rates cash collected, we would never achieve our rates revenue in a given year where we had unpaid rates for a start. And we have to abide by accrual accounting through the Australian accounting standards and under the Local Government Act.
Many years ago, local government, even the Commonwealth, was on a cash basis, and that's exactly what you're asking, councillor. That disappeared probably, I want to say 15 years ago. It is all accrual accounting now.
I don't know if it answers your question, councillor, but you've had
I just
got the answer.
Yeah.
You've got the answer.
We can't do it.
The Act. Okay, councillor Bland was next.
And mine's probably a fairly general question around asset type, and it's probably really more to Matt.
Microphone.
And that is around looking at this.
Councillor.
Microphone.
Probably still got a substantial amount of work to do from September, looking at our budget actuals in assets. How are we going to achieve that? Let's, to be honest, I mean, it's pretty hard to get all this work done. We've had significant rains, etc. Where are we at, really?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Through you, Mayor. Generally, capital spend is back-ended. Most of the first 3 or 4 months of the financial year is planning and setting projects up, and the delivery is generally in the second half of the year. We'd like to bring it forward as much as possible in the future and spread the load over the year, but that's it's often difficult, but that's generally the pattern of spend throughout the calendar of the financial year is the second half is generally probably double that of the first half.
Yeah, I will say, and we've had this conversation with Matt, is that budgets are important, but generally we'll be doing spends on reseal and roads every year. So the planning will start, it won't be a yearly plan now. We'll try and move to a 3-yearly plan or some longer space, knowing that the budget might determine whether we spend 1 million or 1.2, but the planning of it and what you're asking will be much more spread over the year rather than pushed planning for 3 months, finding a contractor for 3 months, finding they can't come in the next 3 months and then back ending it like Matt said. So that takes a little time to move that. It's like one of those big liners turning it around.
So my other part of that question is, contractors are a bit like hen's teeth. Are we hopeful that we will still be able to get contractors at a reasonable price?
That certainly is a risk. The availability of contractors has been a problem. In particular, our sealing contractor, who is located in Victoria, who hasn't been able to cross the border. But in general, in South Australia, the ability to engage contractors has been difficult and will remain a problem going forward, I would suggest.
Can I point out, these are a template of accounts that have never been provided before. These are an attempt to provide elected members on an ongoing basis and the CEO and internal management on how we're tracking according to budget. They are at a higher level, but the same line item level that has been endorsed in the adopted budget. Employee costs, we talked about separation factor. We've already generated $101,000 savings in September 21 on separation factor in our staffing costs. Other things like there, I haven't straight lined the budget. For example, reseals, the whole of the $1.2 million budget is in the months February, March, April. So when you see year-to-date budget, you see 0, you see actual 0. There is no reason and no rhyme just dividing the budget by 12 and making them each month the same, because I'll be constantly reporting a timing variance. Subsequently, with plant and equipment, you can see that we're not intending to spend anything on plant and equipment in the first 3 months of the year. So Matt will have a program that would be designed to deliver that over the course of the year, I think in between November to May. And you'll see these reports, these are templates. I'd like to see endorsement of them if it's possible. We'll provide these quarterly. Once Synergy Soft is up, we'll provide these monthly.
Any more questions? There being none, councillor Roundtree, you'll close.
I will close. Just before I do, I just want to say that that was a really good report, very simple and easy to follow, and I really appreciate the effort you went in to put that together. So thank you, and close.
Thank you. I will put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Number 14 is update on the community wastewater management scheme reserves. There is a recommendation. Councillors, Councillor Bland is the mover. There is a seconder, Councillor Yench. Councillor Bland, you got to start debate, or are you happy?
I'm happy, thank you.
Happy. Is there anyone else? Anything else? Questions, councillors? Councillor Arthur, you wish to ask a question, you may well have a go. But if you don't, and you're not signalling you will, I will move on.
Move on.
I'll move on. Councillor, sorry. While that jocular is going, I didn't see you, Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Mayor. So it says the balance as of June 2021 is 250,000 placed in an equity reserve. Have we got any plans on what the next big expenditure will be for the CWMS schemes?
That, councillor, was the amount placed in the reserve on the result of operations in 2021. There's 1.12 million sitting in the reserve at the end of June 2021.
You, Mayor, Matt might have a view
Go to
about
Matt.
big expenditure.
Did you foresee any urgent large expenditure items?
Through you, Mayor, at this point in time, Pettit Road is our focus with our CWMS. There is also some work that we still need to do around the Tail and Bend lagoons with regards to fencing, which will be used, which will be funded through that reserve. As far as other major capital upgrades or renewal projects, that's yet to be determined.
Miles as well?
Yeah, might as well add in. So the growth strategy may very well identify SWIM's investment that may have a return in terms of urban development. So to have a reserve is a very useful thing.
Through you, Matt. Miles stole my thunder there. I was just going to ask him about the growth strategy and whether the CWMS was included in it. It's nice to see that we've got a reserve, actually. Should we have any upgrades? But it's also nice to hear that the fencing is in the plan as well.
As per the council minute.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Arthur, you do want to ask a question. Yeah.
I'm just asking a question regarding the operation side of things on this. As you all know, the Tinty CWS scheme has been broken down since December last year. Been used since December last year. Now, I believe under the Act, we have to either decommission that or get it going again. Now, has there been money allowed in the budget this year to A, decommission it, or B, fix it up?
Thank you for your question. The intent would be to make sure it works and get it working. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. No other questions? Councillor Bland, you'll close.
Consider it closed.
Thank you. I put the recommendation, item 14, over. Those against, that's carried unanimously. Item 15, staff annual and long service leave entitlements. There's a recommendation. We note the report. Councillor Qualman, the mover. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hill, thank you, Tracy. Any discussion around that or questions? See the report has been managed to reduce it.
Just one question through you, Mayor. It talks
certainly.
about active strategies to ensure that the leave is taken or reduced. Could the CEO just explain what those strategies might look like?
We pay cycle, which is fortnightly. A report is produced, which goes to the directors and myself. And if staff are on there where the leave is looking a little bit getting high, there's a conversation about what leave they intend to take over the next couple of months. The other thing that we intend to do next year is to have a little bit more rigor around our annual leave planning, so that we have a plan that goes 3 to 6 months in advance rather than a little shorter period that we have now, so that we understand the leave patterns and also the people who need to take some leave. I have to admit, last year it was difficult. Most people, if you can't go anywhere, COVID leave was put on hold in a sense, because you couldn't go anywhere, you may as well come to work. But we really are keen. There are some people with some quite long outstanding balances that will be addressed, and some staff take 1 day a week now to get their leave balances down. So there's a combination of things depending on the job they're doing and what they want to do in their life. There are points, and it's not where you want to be, but there are points where you can make people go on leave. It's not the preferred option, because I would rather people have their leave than accumulate it to any degree. So it's always just managing it and being really aware of what the leave is at any point in time, and we do that fortnightly now.
Councillor Bland.
So question in relation to that is, with significant leave, and particularly where staff are significant for servicing one aspect of the business, how are we looking at backfill contract to be able to keep the workload going, because it could be a significant period of time?
So there are probably a couple of positions like that we have through you, Mayor. Michael's job, the rates officer. And so we're starting to think about how do we do that succession planning. They may not be 100% spot on, but how do we fill it? And I think we'll give ourselves a little bit better opportunity if we plan the leave over a 3 or 6 month period rather than the shorter period that we plan now, so that we know where our weaknesses or vulnerabilities will be in 3 months' time. So we've got time to plan for that.
Councillor Taylor.
Through you, Matt, is there an option in local government where there is in commercial organisations where staff can take cash payment instead of the actual leave?
You can take your long service leave as a cash payment. You can pay out some of your toil if you want to. Again, it's not the preferred option, and we do talk with staff who ask for that request, because I think from a OH&S and a just staff welfare perspective, taking leave is better than the cash, but sometimes it's a combination of things, and it is an option available.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, any other questions? There being none, you'll close, councillor Coleman.
Yes, I close.
Thank you. I put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? It's carried unanimously. I see it says other business, which would not be my normal tactic. Item 16 is
Questions with notice and.
yeah.
Well done, bud. Why had it written?
There's no other business. We'll revert back to, as we said, questions with notice, 5.1, councillors.
Notice.
Questions without notice, questions with notice, there is none. Questions without notice, there is none yet.
Questions were
I had
answered.
one there, but it's been answered.
Right, so
it has been
both
answered.
councillors Arthur and Roundtree's questions have been answered through the presentations today. I'm going to put here in big words, answered.
Well, actually, it's not quite answered. I just want one little bit of clarification, if I can, please.
Mm-hmm.
With the new financial software, it was suggested that this would all be maybe done by December. Is that still on track to have everything transferred over? Or do we have a new date when we think that we're finally going to have everything ready?
A lot of shaking your heads here, councillor.
I remember I mentioned earlier in the meeting, 1st of February, We did have originally the 30th of November. We realised that the enormity of the task of cleaning up the old records, the 1st of November, it could have been achieved, but I think we would have killed people basically. So we've moved that to the 1st of February, and again, it spread the workload over the Christmas period, over the time where we're doing the end of year financial statements like we've discussed today. So it was about spreading all of the work that needed to be done along with the migration to the new software.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've moved on to items, motions 6.1. There's none, but 6.2, is there any motions without notice? There is none. Okay, you councillors, I believe the agenda is complete. Thank you very much to all the staff, but I think James, and I see Linda and Wendy in the back, I think you said they saved your, thank you.
Many a time.
Many a time for what I suppose we as elected members have been probably waiting for some time is a financial system we can rely on, and looking forward as well as looking backwards and tidying up the loose ends. And obviously with the new system in place by, I think, February, we will be in a reasonable position to be very confident of where we're heading. Thank you, everyone. I declare the meeting closed at 2:48, Ashley, is that right? Thank you. We are here now at 3 o'clock for a workshop, is that right?
Do we need to log out again or stay on this channel?
Yes, if you could, that would be good. We'll start again new.
Okay.
Log out, councillors. We'll see you in 20 minutes. Thank you, Ash.